Coming up on today's show, what the mayors want to spend your money on. We delve into some of the transport promises in winning mayoral manifestos and ask how realistic they are. Richard has to eat a bit of humble pie over Yorkshire, and the Channel Tunnel turns 30. Hello, and welcome to Green Signals. For the first time from me, Stef Foster, and
as per normal, from me, Richard Bowker.
Now, if you're a regular listener, you might have heard Nigel and Richard mention my name once or twice before, because I'm normally in the background oiling the wheels, as it were. But we knew this day would come at some point.
Making it all happen, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to be polite, you know. But we knew this would happen at some point, didn't we? That you and Nigel wouldn't be available at the same time to be able to record an episode. So we didn't want to miss one. So you get to enjoy my sparkling company this time instead.
And all the better we are for it.
Good. I hope so.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. We've done remarkably well, actually, managing to align diaries. But on this occasion...
And we did try.
And we did try, and Nigel tried his absolute best, but we just couldn't make it work. And we've just decided as a team that we would not miss a show, so hence the reason we're doing this. One of the things that Nigel and I have done this week, by the way, is we've put together a video which is up on the site about the Snowdonian.
Yes.
It's say so ourselves, it's a brilliant little video. We went on the Snowdonian steam train up on the Ffestiniog Railway a couple of weekends ago. I was lucky enough to get a footplate ride with the driver and the fireman, and I filmed it all. And then Nigel's done some absolutely superb captions, which we've added so you can actually work out what's going on, the whole thing. It's only 30 minutes, but the people who've watched it have all said it's the best they've seen. So there's a link it's on our site. We'll put a link in the description. Check it out.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really fantastic because it's so unusual. I think somebody said on Twitter today, didn't they, that it's unusual to see that angle of a steam train or of the Snowdonian as well, because there's loads of videos on YouTube of drone footage and, you know, lots of people have taken some fantastic shots, but nothing from the footplate. So it is unique. It
is unique. And the other thing was the weather was extraordinary. I mean, it was beautiful.
Glorious, wasn't it?
And I had the sun behind us, so... filming it, you got the copper on or is it copper or brass? I'm now in trouble, but anyway.
We are going to be in trouble for not knowing the answer. It was
shiny metal and it looked stunning. So anyway.
It was shiny.
Yeah, so definitely worth a watch.
Yes. Anyway, we must take a few moments to thank not one, not two, but 5 Super Thanks fans on YouTube this week. We were really overwhelmed with the generosity we've had from so many of you. So thank you to Blue Skies Up North, user WS5BN1RQ2I, I really hope I've said that right, Guy B3785, Mr. Dixie 951, and Alan AR Pollock 9683. We are enormously grateful, and we will always take the time to thank viewers who give us super thanks. So thank you.
Thank you.
Now, before we get stuck into the main topics this week, we just want to comment on the huge amount of feedback we've had following the recent interview with Rail Minister Hugh Merriman, which is linked in the description if you're on YouTube. Unsurprisingly, there was real polarisation in the opinions from viewers and listeners, but there were some fairly consistent views, weren't there, Richard, from train drivers?
There were. They were quite strong and clearly articulated, I believe is the phrase. There was, basically, I think most of those who commented just really disagreed with what he'd said. Some of them put it more directly than that. But the general theme was it's the sweeping generalizations, right? You're making sweeping generalizations. You're taking very specific examples, some of which they didn't even agree with those, and applying it across the whole of the sort of the landscape of the railway. Now, look, we had Mick Whelan on the show a couple of months ago now, actually.
We did, yeah.
And Mick, made his case, and we gave him a hopefully a fair hearing, and exactly the same with the rail minister. But this issue of drivers' conditions, and it was things like when they can ask for leave and the time they can do it the day before,
and how long beforehand,
stuff like that. So we're going to do a little bit of fact checking on that, and we'll dig into that, and we'll come back and let people know what we find.
Yeah, definitely. Right, so we've decided to focus mainly on one big thing this time, because the mayoral elections on May the 2nd raised all sorts of questions and got us pondering what some of the outcomes of those elections might mean for the railway and transport in general. So there are 12 metro mayors in the UK, so it would be impossible for us to go through all of them. So we've chosen 4 that we think deserve a bit more of a look at, haven't we?
We have indeed. I suppose the first thing to say, what is a metro mayor? Because it's a relatively new concept. We've had a London mayor for quite a number of years now, obviously starting with Ken Livingstone and Boris Johnson, who could forget either of them, really.
Indeed.
But metro mayors in other devolved English regions, this is very much an English region thing, are relatively new. So I think the big first tranche were in 2017 when they were elected. And basically they are elected leaders of combined authorities. And when I mean combined authority, take as an example Greater Manchester. So Greater Manchester is a combined authority of, I'll miss a few out, but Stockport, Rochdale, Oldham, Wigan, Bolton, Trafford, Salford, right? So they're combined together, and they have devolved powers from Westminster to spend some absolutely colossal amount of money. It's something like 25 billion a year, and it does affect over 40% of the English population. So it's a big,
significant.
It is very significant. And as you said, Steph, there's 12 of them. The elections this time were, I think they were just for 10 of them. It's a bit confusing because there was a new one. You could argue there was a 13th. It wasn't. It was a combination of something that was there before. So there's 12 of them, and we elected 10 of them this time. Some of them, like Liverpool and West Yorkshire, weren't up for re-election, so we've not done those on this show. We might come back to those at some point. And we haven't done London either, because London it's so big and it's quite a mature mayoralty because of the fact it's been around for so long. Now, we will look at TfL at some point.
Well, I feel like that'd be a whole show, really, wouldn't it? So
absolutely right. So what we've done is we've focused on South Yorkshire, West Midlands, because that one's interesting because that's just flipped from Tory to Labour. Tees Valley, because it's just all a bit mad, and Greater Manchester, obviously, which is quite a long way down the bringing stuff back into public control route than perhaps some of the others. So that's 3 Labour, and one that kind of defied the national mood, really. So hopefully a good cross
yes,
section.
that is a good one, yeah. Okay, shall we start then?
Let's start.
So, South Yorkshire Combined Authority. Now, this is Labour Mayor Oliver Coppard, who was re-elected with 51% of the vote, and Conservative candidate Nick Allen trailed behind on just 16.5%, so he won by quite some margin. He was first elected in 2022, but the election there was brought forward because the Police and Crime Commissioner role has been merged with the mayor, as we've seen happen elsewhere. Now, the first thing that caught our eye in this one, and I have to say, I sniggered a bit when I read this because I could just hear your voice in my head, Richard, going, why?
Sorry.
Why? Reopen Doncaster Sheffield Airport, creating a thriving regional airport at the heart of South Yorkshire Airport City, a world-leading centre for sustainable aviation. Richard, go.
There's so much in that, isn't there? I mean, look, in fairness to Oliver Coppard, he got 51% of the vote. I always think if you win an absolute majority, as opposed you're just the biggest vote, then there's a kind of, the mandate there is kind of, everybody else combined didn't get as many as you, basically.
Indeed.
Right? So that's kind of a good thing. Why, though, and this is a kind of a theme with a few of these, isn't it? Why do so many people think an airport is a symbol of regional grandeur or status? I mean, sustainable aviation, I'm not sure, a world-leading centre. I mean, we're actually a relatively small island. I do find this all a bit weird. There's actually four other airports within an hour. And it wasn't this particular one we're talking about, wasn't profitable under the previous ownership. I think it was Peel Group, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Liz Truss vowed to save it and didn't, mind you. There's quite a few things that she didn't do. And
maybe we shouldn't say any more about that.
Maybe we should just move on. It does have substandard transport links compared with its rivals. Maybe that's partly Oliver's point. I don't know really. And there was going to be a very expensive link, something, £4 or £5 million linking the East Coast Main Line that was rejected about 4 years ago. So I don't really get this kind of, we're a region, we're a big region, and to show just how important we are, we're going to have a big regional airport that's going to have world-class links. I'm not sure that's really the right thing in 2024.
No, I don't really understand it either. And it just feels like, how are they going to make that something that works if for such a long time it didn't? What are they going to do differently to make it suddenly profitable and, sustainable, since that is the word of their manifesto? One of the other things was test and trial free travel on public transport for young people in South Yorkshire. How's this one going to work, Richard?
Well, it probably worked quite well. I think there's a kind of a general point, which I do think all these mayoral manifestos are a little bit reticent to mention, which is that none of this is free. The NHS isn't free. Education isn't free. And by the way, before everybody's running to the keyboards going, is he trying to propose privatising? No, I'm not, right? I'm just pointing out that all those things are paid for out of general taxation, which means that those of us, everybody, right, has less money to decide what to go and spend on, make their own choices, right? Because the tax take has been paid for those things. That might be a good thing, right? But the point about this is, that this proposal will cost money. So, but I think the reason why this is probably justified in this case is because young people may live in, deprived areas. They may not have easy access to education. They may not have easy access to jobs. And the barrier is not necessarily physically where they are. It's the fact they can't afford the travel. So I get it, right? And I think that's probably a good thing. And you remember when Bill Reeve was on the show, we were talking about exactly this point with the Leavenmouth link, when he said, look, there's all these kids in this particular part of Fife that simply can't access education because there isn't affordable public transport there. So no, I do get it. I suspect it will be quite successful. It's just not free.
No, and I think that's it. I think it's probably going to be quite a popular thing. But like you say, we just need to remember that it might be free to the end user, but it's not free to everybody else, is it?
That's the phrase, yeah.
And the next thing is they've brought the Supertram back into public control, and they are planning on doing the same with the buses.
Yeah, the Supertram one's interesting because, as you say, that's only recently. It's only recently moved into public control. I did see a great, I think it was a tweet or something that the mayor put out saying, and look, in the first few weeks it was some colossal increase in revenue as percentage points. I thought, right, okay.
Yeah.
I suspect there are other factors there, and let's have a look at this a sustained period of time. But one thing about light rail, it's very expensive, and it's complex. Utility movements and highways changes. It takes time. No, it can be really worth doing. I mean, look at the Manchester experience with Metrolink. I mean, Metrolink's brilliant. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Sheffield system, South Yorkshire's never quite done it for me in the same way, because there's so much more street running, which is lovely for people of a certain age and sort of harking back to the days of old trams. But it does mean it's not as perhaps as operationally flexible as it might be. But it will take time to do it. But anyway, look, it's back in public control, and no doubt they've got lots of plans for it. On the buses, I've got a bit of a concern that people think, oh, buses, bring them back into public control, that's fixed everything. Now, the reality is it's a lot more complex than that. And I suspect, as the Mayor of London has found, and certainly as Andy Burnham is finding, that's just making that decision is just one part of a journey.
Yeah.
And I reckon we should cover that when we talk about West Midlands and Greater Manchester, because there's some interesting lessons to learn from those.
Okay, we'll come back to buses then.
Oh, what a good idea. We should come back to buses. I like buses.
Okay, moving on to Tees Valley Combined Authority. Ben Houchen, Lord as he is now, has been re-elected as the Conservative Mayor for a third term with 53% of the vote. Now, this was the one that I thought was really interesting because, of course, there was quite a lot of pressure on him, considering how nervous the Conservatives were about these elections. And it would have been a real blow to Sunak if Houchen had lost this one. So I think it's a bit interesting, really, to look at how he's done this, because his campaign, if you look at it, was really on his own achievements. It wasn't a Conservative campaign, it was him, and he was running it more like an independent candidate. So perhaps distancing himself from his party was part of his trick here. And we couldn't find a formal manifesto for him, could we? So
No.
What we found instead was a transport plan, which was launched in January 2024, that supposedly benefited from £1 billion released from HS2 promises. But we're really confused by this, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even begin to describe it, does it? And this is, you're absolutely right. This is a guy that doesn't suffer from any issues of self-doubt. I think it's fair to say. And if there is a Tees Valley mayoral manifesto for the Conservative Party, and we've just not found it, but you listening know where it is, could you let us know? Because we wouldn't want to say there wasn't one, when in fact there is one. We just couldn't find it. But trust me,
we'd like to see it.
We'd like to see it. So why is this confusing? Well, it is confusing. And first, we have to talk about a thing that I'm afraid I can't stop calling crusts, but it's not crusts. It's actually
I like that as an acronym, though. It's so great. Crusts.
Yeah, CRSTS, which, of course, as you know, stands for City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement. There you go. Now, CRSTS 1 was launched I think signed off by Grant Shapps a couple of years ago when he was Transport Secretary in 2022. Okay. And for Tees Valley, that was £310 million. When you look at what happened when HS2 was cancelled, they got CRSTS 2, and there was an uplift, which was apparently a windfall that came as a result of cancelling HS2. And those two things together added up to about £1 billion, or thereabouts, just under £1 billion.
Yeah.
So I think, am I right? Is it about 600, 400, or 700, 300? I can't remember what was the split.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So that's CRSTS 2 with the uplift.
Just call it crusts. It's easier.
Just call it crusts, right? So that's what Tees Valley have got. So the only thing we found was in January of 2024, Ben Houchen announced his £1 billion transport plan. You think, right. So that's the £1 billion that matches Crust 2. Well, no, because in his list of things in his £1 billion are some things from Crust 1, right? So that's why we're a bit confused. And we're actually, because we're a bit sad like this, we are going to do quite a deep dive on this and try and work out exactly what's in what part and what is being claimed, because it is confusing. Let's just put it that way. However, there are some interesting things that come out of this, Steph. One, the letter from Grant Shapps for Crust 1 back in 2022 does not read like, okay, there's your cash, off you go, spend it as you want. Actually, there's a lot of control, number one. Number two, there are some significant projects which the letter says, oh, by the way, this is in your settlement, but we, the DFT, will be retaining the control of these, and we will be responsible for the business case. And in all three cases, and there's a sting in the tail, in all three cases, Darlington Station, Northallerton to Eagles Cliff gauge clearance. And for anybody who thinks, what on earth is that? Well,
that'll be me.
That'll be you. Okay. Well, gauge clearance is basically the size of the infrastructure, how big it is, the capacity, how big a train it can pass through it. And if you want to run more freight trains, bigger freight trains, that you might need to improve the gauge clearance. So that's what that is. And then there's another one called Tees Works stations. There's some stations in what was the old British Steelworks. All of those, the department's letter back in July 22 says, we need to retain control of these because they have implications for, we have to ensure integration with the national network. And that's a really key point, right? So it isn't just, there's your money, off you go.
Yeah.
You know, there's quite a lot of residual control, and those three sort of retained. And that, I think, is a really big point when we come back and talk about Greater Manchester and the West Midlands. But we've still not quite got to the bottom of what's in his list and who's paying for it and what pot it's coming out of. But we'll get to that at some point.
We hope.
Oh, no, we will.
We will. You're determined.
You're absolutely determined. Oh, yes.
I mean, I have to say, I wouldn't trust this man to budget my shopping for a week. He seems to think that everything costs £40 million. I mean, if you look at the list, so here's an example. Deliver infrastructure to allow direct rail services between Darlington and Hartlepool, 40 million. Deliver a package of interventions to sort A66 capacity constraints, 40 million. South Bank Railway Station improvements and transport hub park and ride facility, £40 million. And, my favourite, deliver a new Platform 3 for Middlesbrough Station at a faster pace, £40 million. That's a platform.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure whether it was the 40 million was doing it faster as a result of doing it faster, or whether it was actually 40 million. No, it is quite bizarre, isn't it? And we're kind of back to our recurring friend of Haxby Station, and why does it cost £24 million for a 2-platform station, which we are determined to get to the bottom of, and we haven't done yet, but we will do. It's just like, you're absolutely right. And not only that, there's some things on that list, the £1 billion list, is full of road schemes. I mean, it's absolutely chock full of road schemes. Now, you could argue, because I'm sure the mayor would, but that's what we think the transport priorities are for the region, and it's not just about putting it all in one pot, right? Can't really argue with that. That's not
it's fair enough.
It's a fair enough position to adopt, and it was in his plan, and he's being re-elected, so he kind of and he got 53% of the vote, so it's not like he hasn't got a mandate, right? But nobody should be under any doubt. There's loads of road schemes in there. But you're dead right, Steph. I mean, 40 million, and you look at those and you go, yeah, but should they? Should they all cost that amount of money?
Yes, exactly.
Is still a kind of, the unit cost question looms large with this list.
It does. I mean, we'll put a link to all of these on our on our website, so that anybody who wants to have a look at this whole list can do so and can laugh as we have. But one of the things that I just thought was a bit balmy, really, was create a landscape for autonomous vehicles. And that's along with some traffic management investment as well. But £60 million. I mean, for a start, what does that even mean? Create a landscape for autonomous vehicles?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I mean, one of my favourites in here, delivery of 15 trackless autonomous electric trams, but that's what the rest of us called bus, right? In Tees Valley town centres, £20 million. You know, there's some slightly mad stuff here. Teesside International Airport. Hey, we're back to airports again. Teesside
Yay.
International Airport Railway Station, 20 million quid. Now, interesting facts about this. The station was closed in May 2022 because it had fallen into a state of real disrepair. According to the Office of Road and Rails station usage statistics, there are such things, that in 21-22 it was the third least used station in the country, with just 42 passengers in a year. Partly probably because it was served by one train a week in one direction only. And it was a parliamentary train on a Sunday, which is it ran just to sort of keep it open. So it wasn't exactly
proper service,
a money spinner. So, but we're going to spend £20 million on it, apparently.
I know, and I mean, 20 million for that it's a ludicrous amount of money, isn't it? Because for a start, wasn't that station nowhere near the airport? So it was a really long walk anyway. I mean, I don't know whether they're proposing to move it to somewhere more sensible. One would hope so for 20 million.
You would hope so, right.
But the airport wasn't doing well for a number of years, was it? And I mean, the only thing is with building a station there, it does seem to be that the airport itself has had a bit of a turnaround since it was taken into public ownership, which was in 2019. And since then, passenger numbers have soared 96%, which is the biggest increase by a UK airport. And that was during the period that COVID obviously hit and everybody was really struggling. Yeah. It's one of just 6 airports to exceed pre-pandemic numbers. It's won 2 awards since then. And there's a £200 million business park being developed south of the airport. So
are you making a case for Tees International Airport Railway Station then?
It does sound a bit like that, doesn't it? But I suppose it was that I was looking at it thinking, well, okay, £20 million for a station is crazy anyway, because we are probably talking about something small, because let's be honest, this isn't Heathrow, this is Teesside. But I can see that there might be an argument for, if you're trying to regenerate the airport, it's doing pretty well, it's kind of working, then maybe giving it better transport links would be sensible. But I don't think you should spend £20 million on it.
No, and just to be clear, when we say that we don't like £20 million in a railway station, we're talking about 2 platforms, plain line.
Yeah, exactly.
Bus shelters on the platform, really. Nice bus shelters, but bus shelters nonetheless. And a small car park on one side and no real station buildings. Right? I mean, that's when it's £24 million, we go, no. Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
There are some other absolute crackers, by the way. There's an awful lot in the Tees Valley list, which is feasibility study, right? One of my favourites is £1 million for the East Cleveland Rail feasibility study for the Saltburn to Boulby line to be reopened to passengers, right? So this isn't to reopen it. This is £1 million to do a feasibility study. Yeah. If you've got an idle moment, just go and have a look on a rail atlas or even Google Earth, because you can see the railway line on Google Earth when you do the satellite image. I mean, there can't be many examples of a railway that takes a less direct route between 2 points than the line between Saltburn and Boulby, where there is a potash mine, I believe, at one end of it. There are a couple of settlements along the way. I think one of the places is called Loftus, and it's not small, it's reasonable.
Okay.
But the line doesn't even go into Saltburn. The junction's actually before Saltburn Station. So you kind of go, that does not feel like a worthwhile use of £1 million. I mean, that's the problem with all of this stuff. It's almost now the unit of currency in all of these rail projects is $1 million or multiple millions.
Yes.
And there's loads of feasibility studies in here. How you worked it out? How much do all the feasibility studies add up to?
12 million.
£12 million. £12 million to not deliver anything. I know you've got to do proper planning. I know that, if you don't look at stuff carefully, you pay for it later on in terms of lack of understanding and study. I get all that. But £1 million for a railway line that will never be reopened to passenger services just seems a bit of a waste.
I think that's it. I mean, I don't think either of us would have any issue with a feasibility study. It's why does it have to cost £1 million? Because it seems that there's nothing on his list that costs less than that.
That is true.
But anyway, moving on, Greater Manchester. So Andy Burnham was re-elected for the third time with 63.4% of the vote. And this was a really quite stunning win, wasn't it? 420,000 votes compared with a Conservative candidate who got just 69k. I mean, incredible, really. So the manifesto promises that caught our eye with this one was Burnham's completing the B network vision. So this is Manchester's plan to create an integrated tap-in, tap-out system like London has. And I think I'm right, Richard, it would be the first outside London, wouldn't it? That's like that.
Like that, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so it unites bike, bus, tram and train, and it has a daily fare cap like you see in London. Now, the new bit is that he's saying he will bring forward the completion of that scheme by integrating 8 commuter rail lines within the next mayoral term. So that's by 2028. And what struck me here is that he's talking about public ownership of those commuter lines by Transport for Greater Manchester. Now, if Labour wins the general election, what does that mean for Louise Haig's public ownership plans? I mean, how would that work? Or don't we know yet?
Well, I think probably don't we know? We don't know is probably the order of the day, because I suspect the devil will be in the detail. I'll explain why. I've got to be honest. I'm biased, right, when it comes to Greater Manchester for 2 reasons. One is because I was born in Oldham, right? So this is kind of sort of my
Home
part of the world.
turf.
Yeah, and also I like Andy Burnham. I think he's he's a charismatic guy. He's a great communicator. He's got that ability to be, appear to be he's a kind of a man of the people. Really, he's good, and I think, look at the voting numbers, and people have bought into what he's saying and what he's trying to do. However, there are some real challenges with what is being suggested. I mean, you talked about those rail commuter lines. So what are we talking about? We're probably talking about things like, I think on his list he had Wigan to Manchester Victoria, didn't he? That's okay, because that's entirely within the combined area. Alderley Edge to Piccadilly, I suspect that goes into Cheshire. Buxton to Piccadilly, that definitely goes into Derbyshire. Rochdale stopping services, that's almost entirely that'll be within the Combined Authority. Point being that not all of those lines are entirely within the Combined Authority area. So, a bit like in London, really, when people did say, when I was at the Strategic Rail Authority, say, well, why is the mayor sort of being allowed to run services that actually run into places where he has no electoral mandate, right? So that is a bit of a challenge. But the other probably bigger challenge, because there's ways around that, right? The biggest challenge of all is capacity and network constraints. So, the line, if you take, for example, the line from, I don't know, let's take the Buxton one as an example. So those trains run from Manchester Piccadilly to Stockport, and then they branch off and go down to Buxton. That Manchester to Stockport corridor is the West Coast main line, right? And it's stacked full of anti-West Coast trains and cross-country trains and freight trains and northern trains and all the rest of it. So there is a question about shared use and how you divvy that up. Yeah. I don't think anybody's got an issue with Transport for Greater Manchester running devolved services. Merseyrail's doing pretty well in Liverpool, in fairness.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's how do you manage that capacity? Because you can guarantee one thing, Steph. When you add up everybody's wishes, it will be greater than the capacity of the network to deliver it.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I don't think there'll be an issue I think politically it's fine. It'll be how you do it in practice that will be the real issue for Greater Manchester.
Yeah, I think you're right there. So the other big one in Burnham's document is we will establish a Liverpool to Manchester Railway Board to oversee the creation of a publicly operated railway, the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, serving the northwest of England. Now, this is one that he's come up with in conjunction with Steve Rotherham, who was re-elected to Liverpool last week. The idea is to improve links between the two cities after the scrapping of HS2. Now, I quite like it's been suggested that the creation of this board could coincide with the 200th anniversary of the original Liverpool and Manchester Railway in 2029, which I thought was quite a nice idea. But what is all this about, Richard? Because it surely wouldn't deliver an equivalent solution to the one HS2 would have created.
Well, it's rather whimsical in a way, isn't it? That whole, and the timing's nice, the 200 year and all the rest of it. I agree with you. But there are railways today between Liverpool and Manchester. There's multiple routes between Liverpool and Manchester. So is this a new one, as was perhaps envisaged under as Northern Powerhouse Rail, or is this, what are we going to do with the existing ones? I think we're back to this whole kind of, as important as these regional authorities, these combined authorities are, there are huge implications for the rest of the national network. And the Liverpool-Manchester Railway cannot be, you can't develop that in isolation of the national network. It's not possible, right? So maybe the answer is just going to be a big stakeholder group that's got to do this. And maybe that is the answer, and that's what that is the way forward. But I don't think this is going to be a 5-minute job. Will it do what? Well, I mean, Northern Powerhouse Rail. I know Henry Murison, who's the chief executive of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. He's very sort of strong on this in terms of regional connectivity and the east-west links. And maybe we should be good at some point to get Henry on and just chat about the generality of this. I mean, he might not be able to talk about specific projects, but talk about generality of it, because it can't happen in isolation. These authorities can't do these things on their own.
No.
I think it's going to be quite complicated, but a great idea. But I think the detail is going to be quite tricky.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that struck me is, what does this mean for Andy Burnham and Andy Street's plan that they had? Because obviously they were working closely on this HS2 alternative, and Andy Street is no longer the mayor of the West Midlands. So that rather neatly brings us on to West Midlands, doesn't it?
It does.
So Richard Parker has been elected after Andy Street served for 7 years as mayor, and there were just 1,500 votes between them. So this really was quite tight. And I've got to be really brutally honest here. This is the manifesto that I found the least convincing. There's just absolutely no substance in it. It's full of puff and stock phrases like, we need to improve regional capacity and connections to achieve our economic potential and to connect people to jobs, education and leisure. I mean, isn't that just the job of transport? Hasn't he just described what transport does? I'm just not sure what he's going to do to improve capacity and connections. It's just really lots of wishy-washy words, which I found really different to what we see from Andy Burnham, which is much more, he's made commitments, he's got plans, very, very different. I mean, do you agree?
Well, I'm sensing you weren't very impressed with this one.
I wasn't.
No, I wasn't either. It sort of smacked a bit of somebody new to the job, was a bit inexperienced and wasn't quite sure what they were going to do, didn't it?
Well, he wasn't. He's not a politician, is he?
No, but that's not a bad thing of itself. But
not at all. But
with Andy Street, you had a very clear vision of what he was going to try to do and how he thought he was going to do it. Right. Interestingly, the Labour candidate who won, I think the Labour vote in reality was a bit bigger. It wasn't quite as tight as that, because I think there was another candidate, wasn't there, who split the Labour vote in reality by by standing as an independent. So in truth, it was probably bigger than that.
Yeah, good point.
But Andy Burnham's got a plan. Oliver Coppard's got a plan. Bless it, Ben Houchen's got a plan, right?
He does.
This one doesn't feel like there's much of a plan. The one thing that is there is obviously taking back control of the buses, right? Which is a theme that we're seeing across a lot of these Labour led manifesto. So let's just talk about this, because it might give us an insight into the challenges when it comes to rail. Let's just assume for a minute that, and this is economic theory, that a private company acting rationally will be a profit maximizer. Okay. So if that's the case, that rather suggests that if private bus companies have been running bus services, it's because they thought they would make money. And if they haven't run them, it's because they were fairly convinced they wouldn't make money, right? And if they wouldn't make money, that means that they need subsidy or public support. Local authorities, ever since deregulation came in, have been able to say to the private operators, look, we would like you to tender for a service that we would like to pay for, often called socially necessary services. Today, stacks of school bus services are exactly that. Right? So local private operators run these under tender for the local authority. They wouldn't make any money on their own, but we need bus services for schools. Yeah. So it's a good example, right? And lots of rural bus services are the same. What they've decided to do in Manchester, and what others are going to follow, say, no, we don't want to follow that anymore. We want to control it. We want to be responsible for it more. Now, they're not running their own buses, right? They're still contracted like they are in London. So these are still private companies that are winning contracts. Right, but instead of the private company having basically be able to set fares and do everything, now the local authority or Transport for Greater Manchester says you will run these buses from this garage and we are setting fares and we're setting the timetable. You just run the buses to our very tight specification. And it's cost a lot of money, to buy new buses and put them all in a common livery. So what is the benefit of what's happened in Manchester? Well, Andy will say integration, clarity over service planning, ticketing, and being able to have cross. And actually, I agree with all of that. That I think that has got real potential. But there is an elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is congestion. Right. So in these urban environments, all of what's happening in Manchester is great, but unless we improve bus corridors, bus lanes, traffic priority management schemes to allow the buses to be more reliable, there's a serious possibility is they'll look great and be stuck in the same jams. And that was always the issue in the West Midlands when I was at National Express. They would always say to us at West Midlands Passenger Transport Executive, we want you to make the buses run better. Okay, we will invest, but could you please give us some bus lanes and some traffic light priority schemes? Very, very soft stuff, like when a bus approaches a set of traffic lights, there's a beacon and the traffic light knows to change. Clever stuff that's not obvious to motorists necessarily. Can we have all of that, please? Oh, no, that'd be very difficult because motorists wouldn't like that. I know, right? So I just say to the leader of the West Midlands, it's one thing to say you're going to take back control, but it's not just about saying, I am now specifying the service. You've got to do the whole thing. And I think congestion in urban areas, big issue for Richard Parker in the West Midlands.
Okay, so why do you think then that it's important to have public ownership of the railways?
That is indeed a very good question. I think there's differences, right? And the difference is on the railway network, it's back to the point about Manchester or anywhere actually, it's a shared infrastructure and it's highly capacity constrained. And at the moment on the railways, I think performance, reliability, complexity is actually causing a real problem. And that's why I think that more directing mind stuff that we've talked about makes sense because of the system we've got. Not quite the same on buses, because the Highways Authority or the local authority actually probably is the road infrastructure manager. Yeah. It's not, I don't think it's the same level of complexity. That's not to say congestion isn't an issue, right? Like that's where I think one of the biggest problems is. Look, I'm not making a political point on either buses or railways. I think actually private sector on the buses get a bit of a bad rap really, because where they've been good, they are excellent in terms of investment, staff training, efficiency. They've been really very good. And the public sector's had the ability to pay for additional services for a long, long time. But there have been some bad examples as well. So, I don't have a problem with that. It's just congestion is a serious issue, and it is different to the railways, because the railways, the network infrastructure is so much more complex. And at the moment, we're just not doing the basics right. Hence why I think we need a direct in mind.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I can see that. Shall we move on to the quiz?
I think we should move on to the quiz.
Because I've been really looking forward to this.
Yeah, I know. And can I just say, I am so pleased, actually, despite what you're about to say, that it's you and not Nigel, for reasons which will become apparent.
But Nigel's going to wish that he could have this moment, because you need to eat a rather large slice of humble pie, don't you, Richard?
Yeah.
And you know what? I think that I threatened some time ago that I would take your quizmaster privileges away the last time you made a mistake on the quiz, and you wriggled out of it. So I'm not sure whether perhaps this week I should be doing that.
Well, it wouldn't be wholly unfair, I have to say, on this occasion. Shall I explain why I've got to apologise?
Come on.
So I've got to apologise because I said, the question last week was, I gave 5 places: Crewe, York, Derby, Swindon, and Brighton, and said the question was, which is the odd one out and why? And lots of different answers. And I said that the reason is because it's York, because it's the only one that's in the county town of the county that it's in, and try to be very clever and say, Derby's not in Derby. Derby's in Derbyshire, but the county town's Matlock and all that kind of stuff. Nobody got it. So I said, okay, well, look, because we're not mean, since so many people had said it's York because that was only ever a carriage works, we'll let that be the winner. 2 problems. Number 1, York is not the county town of North Yorkshire, as about half a dozen people pointed out, including the person, Karen, I believe, is her name, who pointed out that I'd got it wrong with Richmond a couple of weeks previously. No, the county town of North Yorkshire is, of course, Northallerton. So it's just as well nobody was ever going to get it right, because it was an unanswerable
it wasn't possible, because you were wrong.
It wasn't possible. Do you know what was an even bigger problem? Somebody then came up and said, York was originally, they'd used to build, the North Eastern Railway built locomotives in York like 100 years ago. And I'm like, oh, flipping heck. Right, so we're going to stand by.
So you were wrong on the second one you did.
I was. There was basically nothing on which I was right. So
I'm going to keep that little recording. There was nothing on which I was right. Brilliant.
Specifically about this question, of course.
Yes, okay.
But I was wrong, and I apologise. So there you go. However, last week's question, fortunately, was a lot more straightforward, and quite a few people got it. So the question was, my local constituency in the next general election will be Melksham and Devizes. It's a new seat. The current MP for Devizes is Danny Kruger, who has a most curious connection to the railways. What is it? Well, the winner, who actually has now won twice, and as a result, we're going to change the rules of the competition, actually, which I'll come on to in a minute, was Mr. Coggins' Garage, who said Dan Kruger's mother is Prue Leith, the cooking legend, Bake Off, and was on the British Rail board with responsibility for catering. Some say she saved us from the British Rail sandwich, for which many thanks, Prue. So that's his connection to the railways. And, of course, that was the absolute correct answer. Danny Kruger's mum is Prue Leith, who was on the British Railways board. So you don't need to send me your email, Mr. Coggins, because I've already got it. So you will become the first person to own 2 mugs. But what we're going to do going forward is we're going to change things a bit, because what we've realised is quite a lot of people, when we publish at 12 o'clock, they're either at work or they're just doing stuff and they can't get to the answer as quick as others. So we've decided that what we're going to do is, from now on, when we publish the show at 12 o'clock, you'll have 48 hours, which gives you to sort of Saturday lunchtime, to tell us what the answer is. And you have to tell us either on YouTube or by email. I'm afraid if you do it by Twitter, it's really hard to timestamp it, actually. But if you do it on YouTube and you do it on email, we know exactly when. So please do it on those two things. And then after 48 hours, we'll put all the correct answers into a hat and then we'll draw one out at random. So that's how we're going to do it going forward. That makes sense?
Sounds much fairer.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's this week's question. So we are recording this show on the 8th of May, Stef and me, and it'll go out on the 9th. What important event in the railway's history celebrated its 50th anniversary during the last week? So think about 9th of May when this goes out. In the last week, what important event celebrated its 50th anniversary? If
I
you think
literally have no idea.
You literally have no idea. There you go. So let us know via YouTube or email info@greensignals.org. And then at midday on Saturday, we'll close the competition and we'll put all the correct answers into a pot and we'll draw out one at random.
Sounds good.
It does.
And now we can move on to another anniversary as our good news for today. It was the Channel Tunnel's 30th anniversary on Monday the 6th. And it was opened in 1994 by the Queen. On average, 10 million passengers a year use the Le Shuttle service through the tunnel and a further 11 million on Eurostar. And I found this a little bit bizarre that the stats that were released by Getlink, which runs the Eurotunnel shuttles, said that they also carry around 4 million dogs a year.
Is that right? A year?
Yeah, I thought it was a bit of an odd thing to do, but then there was a woman interviewed on BBC Radio who has worked for Eurotunnel for 28 years, and she said that she's seen gorillas, tigers, a bear, and a raccoon travel through the tunnel.
But presumably not unaccompanied.
Well, one would hope not. I mean, I'm presuming that this was, zoo to zoo transport or something, but very bizarre thing to comment on. But anyway, it cost 4.65 billion to build the Channel Tunnel in the end, when the estimate was just 2.6 billion. That's in 1985 prices. So an 80% overrun. But I should imagine there are very few people today who would say, oh, you shouldn't have built that, it was too expensive. I mean, people just wouldn't want to go back in time and change it now, would they? Yeah,
but nobody would take a national piece of infrastructure of crucial national importance and go, oh, do you know what? It's looking a bit more expensive than it should have been, so we'll can it. I mean, that just wouldn't happen, would it?
No, it wouldn't. I can't imagine anybody would do that.
No. Can you imagine a world without Eurotunnel? I mean, no. I used to, because I'm a little bit older, we used to go to the continent a lot as kids. My parents loved European camping holidays.
Nice.
I know how we lived. Well, it was in the day. It was in the days before you kind of did, jetted off to somewhere hot. So we went camping in Belgium. Right? So we used to get the Sea Link ferry, and all that kind of stuff. And the 90-minute crossing from Dover to Calais, or if we were being very very sort of exciting, would be to Dunkirk or somewhere like that.
Nice.
And yeah, quite. And the whole process was a bit of a nightmare, really. And I love the Eurotunnel, and that it's fantastic. 30 years, it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
But it just shows, doesn't it, that when you build it, after a while, it's like Crossrail. It's exactly the same. Absolutely. I mean, who sits there and goes, I think it probably did cost a bit more than it should have done.
Yeah.
Said nobody ever now.
Yeah, exactly. Just doesn't happen, does it?
No.
And that's sadly all we've got time for this week. I hope you didn't miss Nigel too much, but don't worry, he'll be joining Richard again next week. And we've rather missed him, haven't we, Richard?
Oh, I've missed him a lot. As you say, he'll be back next week. Mind you, have to say, 2 reasons that I was quite pleased he wasn't on the show this particular week.
Go on.
Number 1, because he would have given me such a hard time about getting the quiz wrong.
He would have done.
And I suspect still will.
He will next week.
Well, quite. And number two, because I've got an opportunity without him here just to say how much I'm looking forward to Eurovision this weekend.
What?
Honestly, it is my guilty pleasure. And I watched my first Eurovision in 1974 when ABBA won with Waterloo, of course. I've missed very few since.
I think it was more acceptable back then.
Well, possibly. I know the music's variable, and some of it's absolutely appalling. I know it's absolute madness and chaos and occasionally a bit of a political thing rather. But I just think the whole madness of it is brilliant. And occasionally a country comes up with a song, you just go, what? I mean, it's just quite extraordinary. So, and I could listen to Graham Norton doing his commentary all night. So no, it's we'll be there in front of the telly Saturday night with our little notepads to do our own scoring. And
you don't do that, do you?
Well, I couldn't possibly comment. Now you said that. But anyway, Eurovision night on Saturday. Don't think Nigel will be watching it, judging by his comments on Twitter, but I certainly will. So there you go.
I'm not sure I could look at you the same after you've just admitted that, to be honest. But anyway, moving on. Thank you so much for listening or watching this week. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you're on YouTube, and please subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help. And most importantly, join us again next week. It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.